the authorities and the approvals and the logistic nightmare that would likely create a larger national security risk, I think, to our country and second, third order effects than the J.D. Vance's idea of easily, I imagine, Black Hawks and Little Birds flying across the border and smashing these targets, satellites, geolocating and tagging and using signal intelligence to drop bombs on bad guys. However, we also have to remember, one, it's not just Mexico. I mean, MS-13 is a great example of that. But if we go to war with the cartels, they already have likely millions of people infiltrated into our country who would potentially be proxy agents to operate on their behalf. Guys who are couriers, facilitators, henchmen, just bad dudes who are just quiet because they're just pushing the drugs, who might get orders to create chaos and calamity within the country. Now, what's difficult for me to wrap my head around is in something so catastrophic as the national security issues that we're dealing with the cartels, how do you address it? If we don't have a diplomatic solution in conjunction with a national strategic and potential counterterrorism solution, nothing's going to be accomplished because it would be a war through attrition. We'd kill the top guy, and just like me and you saw in Afghanistan, Iraq, they'll replace him they'll replace him the same day, in the same moment that person is killed. So it's like, what do you keep doing it? You kill the top, and then you create more bad guys that are willing to fight for the cause. And the next thing you know, we're at war with Mexico. At least that's how my strategic brain looks at it, unraveling. And that could be troublesome and worrisome for future national security considerations for the future. It sounds sexy in my mind. Like, I imagine J-Stock would be celebrating the day that happens, but it also is going to be a lot of trouble that if we don't think comprehensively about it, we might end up in more serious issues.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I'm looking back at this overview, and yeah, from a tactical perspective, I'm right where you are. You're thinking, oh, wow, look at the bases that we have in Texas. We'll surge the 160th there. We'll rotate assault squadrons through. Instead of being on standby, you just go to Texas, and you're banging targets south of the border, right? We're just going after the cartel. But what Morgan Luttrell introduced, to me, that is more of like a planning in theory. It seems like they have to establish a strategy first, trying to look at the feasibility of this. But the line that sticks out to me, we have to recognize the Mexican government is being, in a lot of ways, destabilized by the constant flow of fentanyl. I have been very fortunate to do a lot of episodes with people talking to me specifically about the cartel south of the border. There are cartels all over the world, but I'm talking specifically in Mexico. And what's not in that sentence that I believe should be in that sentence that tells a much more accurate picture is that not only is the Mexican government being in a lot of ways destabilized by the flow of fentanyl, I think we need to look at how willing and participatory they are in the fact that the cartels exist. You cannot talk about this issue without talking about corruption. And the people that I have talked to who make their living talking about cartels say that corruption is widespread. So yeah, is it destabilized? Sure. But are they also part and parcel, whether they are turning a blind eye, being paid off, a combination of those things? We have to look at all of those things because these cartels are not operating inside of a vacuum. And also, specifically when it comes to the issue of fentanyl, this gets even more complicated and a global issue when you start working upstream or where are these source chemicals coming from. It is an open secret that they're coming from China. They are arriving at ports in Mexico that are, surprisingly enough, manned and equipped by Chinese personnel, making a handoff of these items to the cartel, which then can put them together. And of course, they are sourcing them north. But None of that is happening in a vacuum. So yeah, it sounds sexy, but we're actually talking about something that is geopolitical in nature. And as much as I love putting a breaching charge on somebody's door and getting your job done, I don't know if that is the solution to this. And I've heard this conversation framed through the lens of also, should we declare the cartels as a terrorist organization? Which in my understanding would actually give the DOD the authorities that they would need to do for cross-border operations or kinetic operations against the cartel. But as you mentioned, it's cutting off the head of one snake, it's replaced. And are we only going to go after the cartel sources on the ground, the agents on the ground? I mean, I live 60 miles from the Canadian border, and I know without a shadow of a doubt, just in talking with my local and federal law enforcement friends that I have in the area, that we have cartel members that are active in the state of Montana. So it goes back to that issue of what direction would these people get if we were to declare them a terrorist organization. On the other side of that, when these people are rolled up, I think that we would probably have an ability to treat them with a little bit more of a heavy hand, because right now it's largely catch and release because they're not a terrorist organization. They may be an illegal or undocumented individual, and states are handling those issues very differently, right? But again, if they're a dedicated and declared terrorist organization, I think you'd have a much more likely opportunity to at least imprison or export out of the country if possible. But it is not. I wish it was as easy as, okay, hey, let's just make a JPEL list, right? Let's put together a targeting list and start at the top and bottom of this. Are we going to go after their money? Are we going to go after the politicians that allow them to facilitate this south of the border and that have incredible influence north of the border? It is not as easy and as precise as it may sound. And like you, the last thing I want is a protracted war with our southern neighbor along the U.S.-Mexico border.